They wore crisp white uniforms and gentle expressions, symbols of compassion, healing, and safety. Yet under the Nazi regime, some of these seemingly benevolent nurses became active participants in one of history's greatest atrocities. Behind the friendly faces of the Reich's medical staff, a deadly loyalty to ideology took root. Nazi nurses were not only witnesses to brutality, many were perpetrators. In hospitals, mental institutions, and concentration camps, trained caregivers oversaw forced sterilizations, administered lethal injections, and selected who would live or die. The same hands that once soothed fevered brows now held syringes filled with poison. Their transformation challenges everything we believe about trust, care, and morality. These were not monsters in disguise, but ordinary women drawn into extraordinary crimes. This is the story of how the uniform of healing became a mask for death, and why remembering their role is vital to understanding how evil wears a smile. The Nazi worldview was steeped in notions of racial purity, national strength, and social hygiene. Medicine became a central tool for implementing these ideas. Doctors and nurses, traditionally tasked with healing, were now agents of control, selection, and extermination. Women were encouraged by the regime to fulfill their roles as mothers, caregivers, and supporters of the Aryan family ideal. Nursing fit perfectly into this framework. It combined feminine virtues, obedience, nurturing, and discipline with national service. But as Nazi policies grew more radical, the demands placed on nurses grew darker. Eugenics had long influenced German medicine. Under Hitler, it became law. Nurses were enlisted to assist with forced sterilizations of people deemed genetically unfit, the mentally ill, physically disabled, Roma, and others. Later, during the so-called T4 euthanasia program, nurses helped murder tens of thousands of patients in psychiatric hospitals and care homes, administering overdoses, starving patients, or simply ignoring their needs. Nurses didn't act alone, but they were indispensable. Their hands-on presence in both public health and secret killing operations blurred the line between care and complicity. The regime's use of medical authority gave these crimes a veneer of legitimacy and made it easier for society to look away. As Nazi policies expanded from sterilization to mass murder, the role of female medical staff followed. Nurses, midwives, and assistants found themselves embedded not only in hospitals, but also in concentration camps and mobile killing operations. Their duties no longer centered on healing. They became instruments of state violence. In camps like Ravensbrück, where thousands of women were imprisoned, nurses took part in medical experiments that left victims mutilated or dead. They monitored forced surgeries without anesthesia, tended to infected wounds caused deliberately, and withheld care from those deemed unworthy. Some assisted SS doctors with selections, deciding who would be sent to forced labor and who to the gas chambers. In euthanasia centers like Hadamar, Sonnenstein, and Hartheim, nurses worked closely with physicians to kill patients systematically. They administered sedatives, injected lethal doses of morphine or scopolamine, and even disguised deaths as natural causes on falsified records. Many of the victims were children, the elderly, or the mentally disabled, those seen as life unworthy of life. Despite the horror, some nurses justified their roles as acts of mercy or patriotic duty. Others simply followed orders, hiding behind the strict chain of command. Yet many embraced their tasks with troubling enthusiasm, showing little resistance. What made their involvement so chilling was the contrast between appearance and action. Dressed in white, offering kind words, these nurses lulled victims into a false sense of safety, only to deliver them to their deaths. They were the soft-spoken enforcers of a deadly regime. Among the many women who transitioned from caregivers to executioners, few stand out more starkly than Greta Bösel. A trained nurse, Busel served as an SS overseer at Ravensbrück concentration camp, a site infamous for its brutality toward female prisoners. She began her career with the Red Cross, but by 1944, she was selecting women for the gas chamber and overseeing forced labor units, where beatings and starvation were routine. Survivor testimonies described Busel as cold and authoritative, often deciding with chilling indifference who was fit to live. One statement recalled her declaring, "If they can't work, let them rot." Her professional background in nursing did not temper her judgment, it enabled it. She knew exactly how to prolong life or end it. Busel was tried at the Hamburg Ravensbrück trials in 1947 and sentenced to death. She was executed by hanging in May of that year. Other lesser-known figures followed similar paths. Hilde Wernicke, also a former nurse, worked at Ravensbrück and later in satellite camps. She was implicated in abuses during prisoner selections and faced trial, but received a lesser sentence due to her lower rank and perceived obedience. Irmgard Huber, the head nurse at Hadamar Euthanasia Center, avoided trial altogether. Despite overseeing thousands of murders disguised as medical care, she remained free after the war, claiming she had merely followed doctors' orders. Her case illustrates how the nurse's role, cloaked in professional trust and feminine virtue, often led to leniency or oversight. These women were not anomalies. Many followed a similar trajectory, entering nursing out of economic need or national pride, and gradually sliding into the role of killer. The medical environment, strict hierarchy, and ideological training helped suppress doubt and moral resistance. In the end, their white uniforms offered a false promise of safety. The hands that once healed became hands that killed, steadily, systematically, and without hesitation. After the fall of the Third Reich, the Allied powers sought to bring Nazi perpetrators to justice through a series of war crimes tribunals. While much attention focused on high-ranking SS officials and military commanders, some medical personnel, including nurses, were also prosecuted, yet accountability was far from consistent. At the Hamburg Ravensbrück trials, several female guards and nurses were tried for crimes against humanity. Greta Busel was among the few nurses sentenced to death and executed. Others received prison sentences, though many served only a fraction of their terms due to post-war political shifts. In general, the further down the hierarchy a nurse stood, the more likely she was to be viewed as a passive follower rather than an active participant. The doctor's trial in Nuremberg in 1946 highlighted the central role of physicians in Nazi crimes, including sterilizations and euthanasia. Nurses, however, were largely absent from this trial. The assumption prevailed that they were subordinates, tools of the male-dominated system, rather than agents of their own will. This perception shielded many from scrutiny. Gender played a powerful role in shaping the outcomes. Nurses were often seen through the lens of traditional femininity, nurturing, obedient, and morally naive. Their crimes were minimized, their motivations misunderstood, and their choices framed as coerced. Many returned to civilian life, never facing trial or public reckoning. This disparity in justice raises enduring ethical questions. Should following orders excuse participation in murder? Can professionalism be an excuse for silence? And how does society judge women who commit violence in roles typically associated with compassion? The lack of comprehensive accountability allowed many stories to fade into obscurity, but history remembers those who were exposed and reminds us that even those sworn to heal can become agents of harm. The legacy of the Nazi nurses stands as a chilling contradiction. Those sworn to care became instruments of death. These were not uneducated fanatics or fringe figures. They were trained professionals who exploited their trusted positions in service of cruelty. Their actions shattered the illusion that compassion and violence cannot coexist in a single role. After the war, The broader public and judicial systems often overlook these women. The nurse's image as a nurturer, deeply embedded in cultural consciousness, proved powerful enough to blur responsibility. Many female perpetrators reintegrated into society quietly, their crimes buried beneath assumptions about gender and innocence. But their legacy continues to inform our understanding of medical ethics and institutional responsibility. The atrocities committed under the guise of care have prompted reforms in how nurses and doctors are trained, emphasizing not only clinical competence, but moral vigilance. Codes of conduct now stress the duty to speak out, even against orders, and to protect the vulnerable under any circumstance. This history is not just about individuals. It's about systems that can turn healing into harm when ethics are abandoned. It is about recognizing how roles associated with kindness and safety can be weaponized when merged with ideology and obedience. To remember these nurses is not to sensationalize their crimes, but to confront a hard truth. The capacity for violence exists even within those tasked with mercy, and that vigilance against complicity, against silence, is the only true safeguard against its return. The story of Nazi nurses forces us to confront a deeply unsettling reality. Those entrusted with care can become agents of cruelty when ethics are surrendered to ideology. Their smiling faces and gentle demeanors masked a deadly allegiance to a regime that valued obedience over humanity. Their crimes were not only of action, but of betrayal, of trust, of profession, of life itself. As we honor the victims, we must also scrutinize those who enabled their suffering under the guise of healing. Because if caregivers can kill, who else might be capable, under the right orders, in the wrong moment,